The ASEAN+3 Macroeconomic Research Office has upgraded Singapore's economic growth to 2.6% this year. For next year, it's 1.7%. That's higher than the earlier forecast of 2.3% for 2025 and 1.6% for next year. The outlook is more optimistic than the Trade and Industry Ministry's most recent forecast. MTI expects this year's growth at between 1.5 and 2.5%. AMRO economists say there are better than expected growth momentum for the second half of 2025. Robust AI-driven electronics demand and strong public infrastructure projects have propelled growth. Now, other factors include the new trade deals that have diffused US tariff tensions. The extension of a trade truce between the US and China also improved Singapore's external outlook. But US trade uncertainties still remain a key risk. The new 100% tariff on pharmaceuticals may dampen growth for Singapore. The sector accounts for up to a third of the country's total exports. Economists add that any tariffs imposed on semiconductors could also hit chip makers here. However, there are bright spots. Singapore can benefit from its advanced manufacturing capacity and talent in the sector. The country could also gain from its status as a safe haven for investors and heightened geopolitical uncertainties. Looking ahead, AMRO's chief economist says Singapore should continue to integrate more with its regional peers.
That regional integration can strengthen the resilience of the region, but of course also continue the integration with the +3 economies, that's China, Japan, and Korea. I think with these economies are also climbing the technological ladder very fast.
For the wider ASEAN+3 region, which includes Japan, China, and Korea, growth is expected at 4.1% this year and 3.8% for next year. This is higher than the previous July forecast of 3.8% for 2025 and 3.6% for 2026. Domestic demand and exports have fueled a strong first half. Now, AMRO says in the near term, the region faces risks from US policy shifts. Further trade barriers could weigh on economic activity. Other risks include weaker growth in major economies. A volatile global market and surges in commodity prices could also derail economic expansion. And for more analysis, we're joined by Runchana Pongsaparn, who is a Group Head for Financial Surveillance at AMRO. Dr. Runchana, thank you for joining us tonight. Now, let's start with ASEAN+3's 2025 growth forecast. That's been revised upwards. Now, will the tech sector and infrastructure projects be enough to sustain this momentum?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. So the revision upwards for the ASEAN+3 growth coming from the domestic demand, particularly investment, as well as export. So a lot of this of export actually come from the front-loading activities that has been going on. Talking about the infrastructure project, certainly this is very important for Singapore that will help carry the growth forward, because what we see is the headwind that will be coming in, especially for next year as the US tariff taking effect.
Right, and speaking of those US tariffs, aside from the trade disputes with the US, what other vulnerabilities does this region face?
So apart from the trade uncertainty, in this region, we are also subject to financial vulnerability, but it's not across the board. So it's only the pockets of vulnerabilities. So even though this region is quite resilient, so we have a strong banking system, we have rather ample international reserve, and so on. But we also, when we look closely, for some countries, they still have a relatively high debt. For example, the high public debt in the +3 economies. And then also in terms of the corporate sector, the micro, small, and medium-sized enterprise are quite vulnerable to the higher burden of debt. So if we have a slower global demand coming in. So we need to watch out for those SMEs who are particularly exposed to the export-oriented sectors, and especially to the U.S. market.
Yeah, well, are the US tariff shocks now considered fully priced in, would you say, especially after Liberation Day's peak? Or are we still expecting pressure from the ever-changing rules?
Actually, U.S. tariff is not a done deal yet. So both on the country-specific trade deals. So for a few countries, the trade deal is not finalized yet. So this includes China as well as Singapore. And at the same time, we also have uncertainty over the sectoral tariff, like semiconductor, which is currently exempted from tariff, but we don't know for how long. And also there's some uncertainty over potential transshipment penalty, which is also something that we need to watch out for, especially for Singapore.
And you know, Singapore has made some early moves to license digital banks. Are we on track to remain a leader in digital banking, especially within ASEAN+3?
Okay. Well, Singapore is certainly the leading in the digital banking area in ASEAN. Although for the +3, they have been advancing a little bit earlier, but for ASEAN, Singapore, well, MAS actually issued a licensing framework ahead of other ASEAN countries. So we have the Philippines started in 2020, Malaysia 2022, Thailand 2025, and now for Indonesia they don't have a separate digital banking license, and but that digital banks actually start operating some time ago.
And Dr. Runchana, which sectors would you say could be potential bright spots, and then which sectors may then possibly be hit harder going forward?
So the potential bright spot would be more AI-related semiconductor, for example. So because the demand for the semiconductor is still quite robust, but also the construction sector, because this is also related to several infrastructure projects that is ongoing in Singapore at the moment. So we have the Changi Airport project, Towers Link, and HDB as well. So these two sectors are should be the bright spot for Singapore, and the ones that of course, might take a hit, especially from the U.S. tariff. Well, not the U.S. tariff, but maybe the slowdown in the global trade overall. So the sectors that are related to trade, transportation, wholesale trade, and also tourism, because Sing dollar has been appreciating quite a lot. And then in terms of the price, many tourists would consider prices in Singapore quite expensive. So that could have an impact in terms of lower tourists coming to Singapore.
Right, and taking into consideration all these challenges, what would you say would it take to sustain Singapore's competitive advantage in this current uncertain climate?
I think what is very important, and the government is actually working on it at the moment, is to upskill and reskill the workforce, and to make sure that the workforce are able to adapt to the new environment with the new skills. So that's one thing. And then, of course, for those vulnerable sectors, there should be the targeted support. And the Singapore government has been doing well in this respect. So, for example, the business adaptation grants, I think that is the initiative that demonstrate that the Singapore government is actually looking into helping business adapt to the global uncertainty that is forthcoming.
Dr. Runchana, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. That was Runchana Pongsaparn, who is a group head for financial surveillance at AMRO.